It's September 1995. Sony releases their first attempt at breaking into the gaming market with the PlayStation. And while Nintendo might have been top dog for the last 2 generations, I think ever since 1995, PlayStation has stayed on top, and I think the biggest reason for this is the technological advances that PlayStation has always exceeded in. But even more so than that, Sony has had and continues to have the most revolutionary catalog of games. And while overall the company may have had an outstanding output of games, each console itself has been more advanced than the competition. So, let's take a look at what sets apart the PS1 from the N64. Most notably, the PlayStation was the first console to utilize CDs. Up until this point, consoles only used cartridges, and the same can be said about the N64. What made CDs so important in this era is the amount of data it could store on each disc compared to a cartridge, with the Nintendo 64 cartridges holding only a tenth of the data that a PS1 CD could hold. With the extra data that can be stored on a PS1 CD comes more opportunities to feature complex graphics and sounds thanks to the PS1 sound processor. The PlayStation 2 might as well be the greatest console of all time. It certainly has the sales numbers for it. The biggest factor for the high sales of the PlayStation 2 was actually the DVD drive that came with the system. You see, in the early 2000s, obviously there wasn't streaming, so we watched everything on DVD players. The DVD drive was meant to be an encouragement for families to own a console as a centerpiece for their living rooms. It wasn't just for games anymore. On top of the DVD drive, the PlayStation 2 was backwards compatible with the entire PlayStation 1 library, essentially completely replacing the PlayStation 1 in all regards. The PlayStation 2 also represented the largest technical jump we've seen in gaming, arguably even more so than the jump to 3D. We went from low poly textures of vaguely human characters to accurate depictions of reality. I have a soft spot for the PlayStation 3, as it was the only console I didn't grow up owning. Instead, I would play games with my cousin on his PS3 that he got for his 21st birthday. That being said, most of my experiences playing PS3 games were as a late teen and a young adult, and I can say with the utmost certainty that this console generation was home to the greatest games of all time. The Uncharted games, the Infamous series, God of War 3, Little Big Planet, and so many more got their start on this console. In terms of technology, the PlayStation 3 wasn't completely more advanced than the Xbox 360. However, you could argue that it was more important in terms of revolutionizing technology. While the Xbox 360 may have had better performance capabilities, the PS3 had a better graphics card thanks to the new cell processor implemented in the system. This did come with some downsides, however. Although games developed strictly for the PlayStation 3 looked and ran better than games developed for the Xbox 360, cross-platform games didn't run nearly as well as they did for the Xbox 360. This was due to the cell processor being notoriously difficult to develop for, but the few developers that got to know the processor got the opportunity to release the best-looking games of the generation. Metal Gear Solid 4 came out incredibly early in the console's lifespan in 2007. However, it is one of the best-looking games on either console because Kojima and his team took the time to get to know the inner workings of the PS3. The PlayStation 4 is the first modern console that I owned as a kid, at least at the time it was. It's probably the single console that I have the most time with. Right around this point in time, the differences between consoles get slimmer and slimmer, as the distinction between performance and graphics capabilities becomes incredibly thin, with the console outputs being so minuscule that they are practically the same, and the larger differences being slightly gimmicky. Technically, the base PS4 is still more advanced than the base Xbox One, but at this point, the only major difference is the incorporation of VR support for Sony consoles. Microsoft kinda dropped the ball this generation, which gave Sony the upper hand to steamroll them with their exclusives, but other than that, there isn't much to say in terms of technical capabilities. The PS5 belongs to the current and ongoing generation of consoles. There isn't much of a difference between PlayStation and Xbox in terms of performance and graphics once again. However, there is one thing that Sony has over Microsoft: the DualSense controller. This controller features adaptive triggers that help in immersing you in whatever game you are playing. If you're playing Call of Duty, you can enable haptic feedback settings which adds resistance to your triggers, simulating the pull of a real gun trigger. Or in the Spider-Man games, where enabling haptic feedback adds a kick to your triggers when shooting a web, as if you were physically shooting a web yourself. It also features a built-in microphone and speaker, which is important for the ever-growing popularity of heavily online and online-only titles. Although, you might just be better off purchasing a headset, because even though there is a microphone built in, it isn't of the greatest quality.
I don't know, man, this mic is pretty good.
As stated previously, this generation is still ongoing, and new technology could be released that could sway in favor of either major console.
Right in, I'm over here stroking my...
So, let's talk about the future. So, what's next? What does Sony have in mind for the PlayStation brand in the coming generations? Well, in an interview with Norges Bank Investment Management, Sony CEO Kenichiro Yoshida spoke on the topic.
While PlayStation will remain our core product, we will expand our gaming experiences to PC, mobile, and cloud.
If what Yoshida says is true, the future of Sony may be on our PCs. There is no word on the next generation of consoles, only rumors and speculations that pop up here and there. The current landscape of gaming has been relatively uncertain, as major AAA companies are downsizing and or shutting down left and right. It's possible that there might not even be a PlayStation 6, as the direction seems to be heading into a software-only market. Games are getting way more time-consuming and expensive to produce. It would make sense why Sony would want to focus solely on making games for PC or cloud streaming services. I mean, most consoles have usually sold at a loss, banking on game sales and online services to cover the losses. No matter what the future entails for Sony, I do know one thing: they'll do it better than the rest of the competition.